Welcome, Acolytes, and by the hoary hosts of Hoggoth, I welcome you to another eldritched episode of the Comic Book University. I am your host, Professor Bill. Let's get started. Guys, Doctor Strange started in a comic book called Strange Tales, which began publication with issue 1 back in 1951. Now, this was 10 years after issue 1 of Captain America Comics, and 10 years before issue 1 of the Fantastic Four. It was one of 4 successful Pulp Fiction titles, including Tales to Astonish, Tales of Suspense, and Journey into Mystery. Like the other comics, it was divided into 4 equal parts, with 5 pages assigned to each, and there was also a 2-page written story with no illustrations. Marvel did have other publications like this, but none of them were nearly as famous as these 4. None of them were nearly as successful. Now, these were basically just Pulp Fiction stories with nothing to really follow up on. There was no real continuity expected in them. And they were just short stories, horror-filled, with regular humans typically fighting monsters or threats from outer space. Now, after the success of Fantastic Four in November of 1961, Marvel realized it could re-enter the superhero genre, which was mostly dominated completely and utterly by DC Comics. By utilizing these multi-part, multi-story pulp magazines, Marvel was able to introduce many new heroes to the genre. Ant-Man was in Tales to Astonish, Thor was introduced in Journey into Mystery, and Iron Man in Tales of Suspense. Now, 2 years after the Fantastic Four appeared, they boosted sales in Strange Tales with a Human Torch story as a headliner, taking half the comic, leaving room for 2 more 5-page stories. One of these stories was Doctor Strange, Master of Black Magic. Now, it should be understood what black magic is. Pulp icons like Albert Camus, Ayn Rand, and Aleister Crowley, people who made us question ourselves, the world, existence. These people were very prevalent during the time and influenced a lot of thought. Aleister Crowley, while not a comic book character, was a character in and of himself. Perhaps one day I'll get around to actually making a story about him. Now, white magic is usually what we do to ourselves, such as healing ourselves or astral travel. Black magic is causing changes outside of yourself, like changing the weather, mending a book or a sweater, even healing someone else. But we mostly associate it with cursing someone, like the evil eye. Now, while many of the Marvel characters are based off of earlier Marvel characters from that first real Silver Age generation, case in point, the Hulk was based off of the Thing, Spider-Man was based off of the Human Torch, Daredevil was based off of Spider-Man. Doctor Strange was a hero unto himself, just in his origin alone. There was no radioactivity or science gone wrong. While there was an accident, that's not what caused his powers. It's actually what broke him. It was part of the journey that led him to getting his powers. Now, Doctor Strange, unlike most characters in comic books, actually chose his powers. Created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, both Steve and Stan were influenced by the radio production and later the movies of Chandu the Magician, who traveled to India and learned the mystical arts employing teleportation, illusion, and astral travel. Ditko was further influenced by Mr. Mystic, a Will Eisner and Bob Powell creation. The look of Doctor Strange, however, was based on Vincent Price. In the comics, his full name is Dr. Stephen Vincent Strange, and Stan was careful to spell out the entire word, not DR, but Doctor, to avoid confusion with other Doctor characters, especially the DC villain Hugo Strange. Now, as I mentioned, there were 20 pages worth of panels devoted to this comic, not including the 2 to 3 pages of written story. Now, the Human Torch took over the first half of this comic, leaving 2 5-page stories left over. And these were typically taken up by, like I said, alien stories, monster stories, some kind of horror story with a human who has to find a way to overcome these impossible odds. Well, one of these stories, in the back of issue number 110, involved Doctor Strange. In issue 110, Doctor Strange, Master of Black Magic, was the last story, hidden in the back, with absolutely no cover acknowledgement. Issue 110 and 11 both had a Doctor Strange story. Fans loved what they saw in issue number 110 so much that they wrote in demanding more. However, issues number 112 and 113 were already finished and didn't have a Doctor Strange story. but they did begin adding him with issue number 114, and in issue 115, he got an 8-page origin. Later, Doctor Strange would take the entire second half of the comic, and eventually the Human Torch would be replaced by Nick Fury, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, Doctor Strange really never got a lot of love on the cover. In fact, aside from Strange's face in the window, you'd never know he was in the comic. When the series ended, however, Doctor Strange took the numbering for his comics' first volume. The Strange Tales comic ended with issue number 168, and the first volume of Doctor Strange began with issue number 169, and it went 15 issues until November of 1969 with issue number 183. Now, 2.5 years later, in July of 1972, the character moved to the Marvel Premiere title with issue number 3. The first 2 issues featured Adam Warlock, who eventually went on to his own series. The Marvel Premiere Doctor Strange ran for 12 issues. The story finished with issue 14 in March of 74, where it became its own title again, with Doctor Strange Volume 2, Number 1, in June of 74. Volume 2 ran for 81 issues, ending in February of 1987. In November of 88, almost 2 years later, Volume 1 of Doctor Strange, Sorcerer Supreme began. There have been several series and titles of Doctor Strange, but none of them particularly impressive, because you can't really run a series of Doctor Strange. Maybe that's why the 1978 Doctor Strange movie wasn't picked up for a TV series. My feelings are that Doctor Strange is best in doses, and as a supporting character. Certain individual issues, storylines, or miniseries are great, inspiring even. But a series doesn't work well. You too can join the Comic Book University simply by subscribing below. And by the 12 rings of Ragador, guys, class dismissed.